you been a member of ST?
Oh, off and on since 1978 or something. Yeah. So it's been a while. Yeah.
Okay.
We're live. Right.
Okay, we might make a start. So welcome everyone tonight to members that are here, also to visitors, very welcome, and also to our members on our live stream, watching from home. Just a few announcements. So September the 28th, I'll have to refer to the... Oh, yes. A viewing night at York Creek Observatory, so it's near Georgetown. If you ever want to have a pleasant weekend, I'd suggest travel up to Georgetown, spend the weekend there on their observatory night. It's a terrific venue, and they're very friendly and make you welcome up there. The next event is October the 5th. We've got a members observing and photography night at Mount Pleasant. Then October 18th to 20th, we've got the annual astronomy weekend at Font Hill. Matt Burniston is taking bookings for those. There are two cabins left, so get in quickly. See him at the break or earlier. October the 22nd. Thanks, Chris. October the 22nd. Dallas will be holding a beginner's theory workshop on basic astrophotography and guiding. So that's here at the Rosny Library. And October the 25th, we've got the annual dinner, which is at the Richmond Arms. So it's Friday, October the 25th, isn't it? And once again, Matt's taking bookings for the annual dinner. So moving to tonight's events, the main part of our program is Richard Grudzien is going to give us a presentation on medieval and Renaissance astronomers. There will be a tea break in about an hour's time, we hope.
All right.
Well, you'll find out. But there'll be a tea break, and during the tea break, Richard will fire up the presentation of members' astrophotographs and images that we had at the open night a couple of weeks ago, and I think you'll find it terrific, some terrific images there. And then following the break, Richard will give us a highlights of the night sky in October.
Oh no, we won't have that.
We're not having that.
No. No, there won't be any time for it. No, but not only that, there'll be this display. I was just going to have the display going. So
Richard will probably talk to you about some of the highlights, but the main thing is this display, which is amazing. So thank you very much, and over to you, Richard.
Thank you. So now don't be daunted by all the notes you see, because they're for me, not for you. So don't try and squint and read them. But there are notes there about things that I'm going to talk about. I got so besotted with this topic that I got sidetracked and started reading about medieval history and all these Charlemagne and goodness knows who else, and all of these emperors and popes, and you realise that living in the 20th and 21st century is nothing. It's completely simple compared to what life would have been like living in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, which was incredible. How anyone managed to think of anything in that time beggars belief. I think, excuse me, there's someone else wanting to come in. Looking to come in? Yeah. So what I'm going to do, I'll get underway, and I want to sort of provide a bit of a cultural context. Rather than just talking about these astronomers, I thought I'd give you a bit of a background on the Middle Ages and the various stages of the Middle Ages, and then a little bit about the astronomers in the Middle Ages. There's not a lot about them. Some of them there's very little information, others there's quite a bit, but I can't talk about all of them. So, and then we'll get on to the Renaissance. Now, I've had to cut out Galileo because dealing with 3 Renaissance astronomers was long enough. dealing with Galileo would have made another story completely on its own. So you could spend a whole hour easily just talking about Galileo. So, without further ado, lights. If we didn't have lights up. Hopefully this will work. First bit should be automatic. So, for those of you who might have missed it, the first one was about ancient astronomers. That was early in the year. So this is part 2. So, let's move on. Oh, sorry. It's not supposed to do that. Okay. Kill the sound. Excuse me. It's not supposed to be playing. I don't know why it is. I will turn the sound off. Is that brightness, is it? Oh, hang on. Yeah, I can't see without these glasses. Sorry, this way. Yep. Right, okay. Sorry, you shouldn't have any more music after that. I don't know why I played across that slide. We'll start the slideshow from there. Sorry about that hiccup. From current slide. Okay, so. All right. The Middle Ages. What a shocking time to have lived in. We all know it's that period of history. The Roman Empire disintegrated. 476 AD, sack of Rome. And from there, things got worse. Individual invaders, mainly Visigoths, Goths, other people, mainly from Germany, then Huns, invaded the western part of the empire. And the centre of power remained in the east with the Holy Roman Emperor. Well, not the Holy Roman Emperor, that came later, with the Pope. Does that make sense to everybody? Just simplifying things a bit. So the western half of the empire basically disintegrated. And a whole series of little kingdoms developed, Gothic kingdoms and other kingdoms. And this period that I'm going to do now is the period it covers about 1,000 years. So from the sack of Rome in 476, Rome persisted, by the way. People think Rome didn't exist after 476. Quite the opposite is true. The Odoacer and the Huns that invaded, not the Huns, the Goths, that invaded Rome didn't actually destroy the buildings or anything else. They just looted it and took all the money and gold and then left everything intact. And in fact, the irony is that they became Latinized. The culture of Rome still persisted in the West for quite a while. And some of these Germanic tribes and nations actually picked up a bit of the Roman culture. So it didn't vanish, it didn't disappear completely. Anyway, so we're looking at about 1,000 years. The 13th, 14th and 15th centuries represent the Renaissance, basically. Although a lot of scholars argue about it and say that that's not the case. It depends on what you look at. But let's look at the Middle Ages. So they divide the Middle Ages up into 3 bits. The early times, population decline, lots of people on the move, the invasions that I just mentioned to you, disintegration of the Western Empire. The Eastern survived, but eventually it lost control of the Middle East and North Africa. And of course, then after that, when we get to the Renaissance, you have the rise of Islam and the Crusades, and we'll come to that later. Anyway, in the post-Roman world, the fusion of Roman culture with the customs of invading tribes is well documented. So, the settlement of peoples was accompanied by changes. Latin, the literary language of the rest of the empire, was gradually replaced by vernacular. Now, vernacular just means the ordinary, everyday languages of people, derived from Latin, and then you had the development of Romance languages. Now, Spanish, Romance languages, Spanish, Latin, Italian, and Romanian. Romanian is a derivative of Latin, believe it or not. A lot of people don't realise that. Romanian is a language that comes from Latin. Anyway, the Greek remained the language of the eastern half of the empire, the Byzantine Empire. Why is it called Byzantine? Because of Byzantium, which was ancient Constantinople. Some of you might know. So, from history. So the early Middle Ages. Let's have a quick look at, anyone guess who that is? One of my favourite. Sorry? No, yeah. Now this is the Emperor Justinian. Now he was a phenomenal individual, quite a phenomenal individual, and managed Byzantine Emperor in the East. His general, I was reading about, I got sidetracked by that too, Belisarius. Belisarius was a brilliant general. You never hear about him in history books. One of the names just disappears, but he conquered and regained a lot of the territory that had been lost. So Belisarius is an interesting character. Anyway, he's the emperor who designed Hagia Sophia. You know that big building with the minarets in Turkey today? Beautiful thing in Byzantium. Yeah, gorgeous looking building. Anyway, his reign saw the outbreak. Now, I've mentioned this for a deliberate reason because we're going to come back to it later, and that is the bubonic plague. So people didn't realise there was an outbreak during this time, the 6th century. So the bubonic plague didn't just suddenly appear later on. It actually was there once and then disappeared for a time and then came back later in the Renaissance. So the early Renaissance. Outbreak of the bubonic plague, retroactively called the Plague of Justinian. Great emperor gets a plague named after him. I mean, that's pretty rough. Anyway, the emperor himself was afflicted, and within the span of less than a year, an estimated 200,000 people from Constantinople perished. These plagues, I mean, they may look like the Spanish flu and others look like child's play, really. They were just, wait till you get to the bubonic plague, the major outbreak. Now, the High Middle Ages, sort of middle period of that lasted from 1000 to 1300. So we've gone from 476 to 1000, now 1000 to 14 to 1300. Rapidly increasing population of Europe, great social and political change, you can say that again from my reading of it, until the Renaissance of the 12th century, including the first developments of rural exodus and urbanisation, people living the land and living in cities. By 1350, the population increase had greatly benefited the European economy. At this time too, the Crusades. Everywhere you look in medieval history, religion is at the basis of a lot of the strife. Absolutely. And the Christian church, as you'll see, stuck to its guns when it came to the Catholic Church, when it came to seeing the world as it was according to Ptolemy. And the reason for that was, if you look at it, you might remember when I gave a talk on the early astronomers, the ancient astronomers, they were always talking about spheres, the planets moving on spheres. Everything was in cubes and spheres. There was nothing else. The sphere is a perfect orb. And so it was imagined that everything travelled in circles and on these orbs. And so I'm simplifying things a bit. It's not very technical, but the church probably endorsed that view because there's nothing more perfect than a sphere, and it all made sense, and they weren't going to question the status quo. And this stayed for 1,000 years. This worldview, with the earth at the centre and everything else going around it. Anyway, we'll talk about that shortly. So the Catholic Crusade started. Now, I used to think the Knights Templar were heroic, and you've seen Monty Python films, and you see these knights and they're helping pilgrims to the Holy Land and all of this sort of thing. And then they've got another group that's like them. I forget their name, beginning with H, Hussonites or something. And they were all fighting each other as well. And the whole basis of it was greed. It was money and land, because the Knights Templar got very rich. It wasn't necessarily about dogma, about religious beliefs. It was about land. And a lot of the conflicts, and the church got jealous. People got jealous of these little, and they were doing good things. They were actually helping people. But they got wealthy in the process. You can ask, well, if they were good, how did they get rich? But anyway, they managed to get, through wealthier individuals who joined the order. So you had the Knights Templar going off to help people, and the Crusades began against Islam, mostly. But not exclusively, because there were Catholic groups fighting Catholic groups too. It wasn't as simple as that. So the Catholic Crusades, 11th to 13th century, conducted under papal authority, that is, the Pope endorsed them, with the intent of re-establishing Christian rule in the Holy Land. Now, by this time, it had been under Muslim control. So as you'll see, there were quite a few Muslim wonderful Muslim astronomers, which I'll come to shortly in this time period, but they had control of the Middle East. Now, nothing has changed. When you look at the situation today, as we speak in the Middle East, these things are historical and they go back thousands of years, the Holy Land is occupied by people today who are still arguing about it. And I don't think anything's changed. So human history is pretty appalling. Anyway, the Fatimids had captured Palestine, lost it to the Turks, and recaptured in 1098. And when you read about these conflicts, they just go on and on and on. And it's always about revenge. It's always about revenge and getting things back. And so that's why you have a 30 years war, a 50, 80 years war, and 100 years war. And it's all about, I don't know what happened there. It's an empty square. The late Middle Ages, anyway, I'll come back to that. Well, the late medieval period, from AD 1300 to 1500, this is really during the phasing into the Renaissance. The Middle Ages preceded the onset of the early modern period, and in much of Europe, the Renaissance. It also includes, of course, the Reformation and the split in the church, which occurred under Martin Luther. So that's the 16th century, end of this period. So how these astronomers lived in this turmoil, I'll never know, and how they got anything done at all beggars belief. Around 1350, a series of famines and plagues, including the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 and the Black Death, which was in 1347, reduced the population to around half of what it had been. Now they reckon about second pandemic, the most devastating pandemic in world history. It was a descendant of the ancient plague that had afflicted Rome that we just talked about under the Emperor Justinian. So the bubonic plague was caused by a bacillus, a germ, called Yersinia pestis, which was carried by fleas on rats. They were the vectors. But not just that. Now, what you don't read here is, and this is quite interesting, these, in the Far East, there were fur trappers. You know the big trade routes going into the Middle East from the Far East. There were fur trappers, and they caught this thing, which is the biggest squirrel of all, called the marmot. Have you heard of a marmot? So marmots, the fur trappers, captured these marmots and then started getting sick themselves, and they carried the furs back into the Middle East, transported to the Middle East. There at a port called Kaffa, which is on the Black Sea, which was under siege at the time they arrived with these furs, by the way. There's always fighting going on. I won't spoil the story for you. You won't believe what went on when they found out that these people were sick. But anyway, so these marmot furs were sold and then distributed, and of course by ship they entered from the Black Sea. They entered the Mediterranean through Constantinople back into the Mediterranean, and then from there it spread all the way up into Scandinavia, Britain and Scandinavia and elsewhere, but mostly through Europe. Devastating. Anyway, so social unrest, endemic warfare, well, we know that. France and England experienced serious peasant uprisings, as well as a century of intermittent conflict, the 100 Years' War, another war. The unity of the church was temporarily shattered by the Western Schism or Papal Schism, that is a division within the church between West and East. Collectively, those events are sometimes called the crisis of the late Middle Ages. I reckon that it was all a crisis, frankly. The 14th century was also a time, though, of absorption of great progress in arts and sciences. A renewed interest in ancient Greek and Roman texts, we all know that. Now, people from the Middle East, Arabic texts were translations of ancient Greek texts and Roman texts. They would the Greek, all of the Greek learning and everything else was translated, and then it made its way into places like Spain and the western part of the empire, which had been Latinized, and therefore it was translated into Latin. So you had Greek going into Latin, you had all of that preserved, courtesy of the very people who overran these places, the Arab people. So if it hadn't been for them, you wouldn't have had any of those texts preserved. So it was fortuitous that they did that, as you'll see. Anyway, the availability of important Greek texts accelerated with the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks, where many Byzantine scholars had to seek refuge in the West, particularly Italy, and then they took all that learning with them. Now, there's certain technological innovations. The gunpowder, The Gutenberg printing press, remember Gutenberg and his printing press, which really made things, sped things up, especially for our friend Kepler, as you'll see. The introduction of gunpowder in the battlefield made some dramatic changes. The compass, the cross staff. I'm not quite sure which cross staff they're referring to there. Does anyone know?
It's basically a device to measure your latitude.
Oh, right.
And it's like a stick
Stick with a,
with a cross.
Yeah.
I don't know the measurement exactly. It wasn't that accurate. The section is more accurate.
yeah,
But there's a
precursor to things that like astrolabes and all of those things. Yep. Yep. Oh, yes, we'll come to that. Mariners, astrolabe, advances in shipbuilding and so on. Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff that went on that wasn't completely devoid of invention. But anyway, let's move on now. The Black Death, just quickly. I found this topic immensely interesting. Here's a grave in France. They've uncovered where there were mass burials of people, obviously. And now, the Black Death, I've told you about what the pest was. At the time that it arrived, there was a guy from the Mongol steppes, Kipchak Khan, Genghis Khan, those names might be familiar, who was besieging the Genoese trading port of Capua. Genoese from Genoa, which is in the northwest of Italy. Had a big empire, wouldn't believe it, northwest of Italy, but it had land over in the Blacks, had ports everywhere. The Genoese were very wealthy, along with later on with the Venetians and others. But the Genoese controlled that port. Anyway, he was besieging it. And then he found all these dead people or dying people, and he catapulted their bodies over into the port city. And of course, he used a thing called a trebuchet. Now, trebuchets are gigantic catapults. Now, having been a student and lover of Roman history, I used to love these siege engines. Most interesting things to read about. The trebuchet was the biggest, and it could launch up to between 600 and 900 kilogram loads, and several hundred meters, like 300, 400 meters, well away from the range of archers. So you weren't within the range of archers, but you could launch these things, and you could cause all sorts of catastrophes, fireballs, whatever you liked. Anyway, that would go a long way. And the release mechanism was so dangerous, I wouldn't like to be near it when you saw how they released these catapults. Very frightening. But anyway, the Black Death ravaged Europe between 1347 and 1351 and beyond. It took rich people, poor people, and of course, at this time you had that play, anthology of short stories by Boccaccio, the Decameron, also appearing on Netflix as a series. I don't know if any of you watched it. Some of you might have. The Decameron. It was based on the Black Death. And rich people got themselves together inside castles and locked all the poor people out who were outside. Let me in, they all died. And the rich so this is a story about 7 people, I think, and 10 people who locked themselves in this wealthy woman's place, and what happens to them. Anyway, you should. It's probably worth watching on Netflix. I've seen it. It's quite interesting. A bit of dark humour, really dark humour, as you can imagine, given it's a plague. Anyway, this had a profound effect on Europe. They reckon now, the statistics say somewhere between 20 to 30 million people died. And they reckon it was half the population, up to half the population of Europe. The estimates vary quite a bit. But imagine depopulating half of the continent. That's an enormous tragedy, really. Anyway, of course, what happened? The Jews got blamed. So there were pogroms or purges of the Jews. Now, this has been, it goes back to Roman times, but often they were blamed for things like this. So they were blamed. And their extremist cults developed as well. And people turned away from traditional religion to a point. Because, where was God in all of this? Anyway, and Jews blamed for the Black Death. Anyway, the wave of violent purges ensued, and entire Jewish communities were killed by mobs or burnt at the stake. What a cheerful time to be living in. Now, by the way, the Black the Black Death aside, in 1197, what had been set up? The Inquisition. The church had, and do you know why that part of the reason for the setup of the Inquisition? I couldn't believe when I read about this. People who weren't Catholics looked for help from the Catholics and said they were converted. So there were Jews who were trying to convert to Christianity and so on. And the Inquisition was set up to find out if they were, what was going, why were they doing this, and what were their motives. And so the Inquisition was a terrible thing to add another layer of misery on top of the misery that was already there. By the way, that's how the Black Death, this area here, see that bit there? That's Kaffa. So that's where it, this thing is actually working now, is it? Oh, right. Anyway, so that's Kaffa. That's where, and you can see the direction of trade spread the plague everywhere. Anyway, let's leave that. I'll speed up a bit. So a quarter of the third of the population died. Shocking thing. Now, do you remember that Monty Python film? Was it Meaning of Life, where they said, "Bring out your dead"? Well, it's based on a real chant by town criers, "Bring out your dead," and they did. So anyway, the population of Western Europe did not again reach its pre-1348 level until the beginning of the 16th century. 150 years or something before it actually started to recover back to what it was before the Black Death took hold. Something jerky about that, I don't know what this. Now that's a one, I'll come to that little, have a look at that lovely little bit of Arabic script there. I'll come to that in a moment. The fall of the Roman Empire in the Dark Ages in Europe for the next 1300 years as the medieval Middle East, provides the advancements in astronomy. Contrary to common misconception, the period from the classical era to the Renaissance was not devoid of scientific progress. The Arabic and the Persian world under Islam became highly cultured, and many important works of knowledge from Greek astronomy, as I said earlier, and Indian astronomy and Persian astronomy were translated into Arabic, used and stored in libraries throughout the area, and the translations were then transported to Islamic Spain, where they eventually fell into Christian hands and were translated into Latin. So that's the journey from east to west. An important contribution of Islamic astronomers was their emphasis on observational astronomy. Now, if I had to characterise the Middle Ages compared to the Renaissance, I would say, from my reading of it, I might be wrong, but I think in the Middle Ages, the scientists, especially astronomers, were concerned with recording in increasingly accurate ways the data that they observed with the eye. They had no telescopes, obviously, so all they could do was rely on their sight of the night sky. And they found ways using those devices, astrolabes and other things that they devised, to measure the movement of the heavens. And they found ways of refining those instruments. There's some beautiful ones I'll show you shortly from the Arabic world. They're stunning looking things made of brass and really fantastic. I'd love to have one just as a model at home to put on display. Beautiful things. You probably can buy them actually, or replicas. So that's the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages is about recording and getting more accurate information about observations. But if you go to the Renaissance, the thinking side of things, the using the data and interpreting it started to happen more. It's not that they didn't do that in the Middle Ages, but other things intervened probably. They didn't have enough equipment, the right sort of equipment. And then suddenly in the Renaissance, all of that takes place and observations not only become more accurate, but you can make some deductions. And that's where all the questioning about the model that Ptolemy devised started to fall down and was criticised and fell apart. But even then, as you'll see, Kepler's ideas weren't accepted straight away either. I'll come to that in a minute. Anyway, that's a Zij star catalogue from the Middle East. Is there nothing else? Has it stuck? What's happened there? Oh, there we go. So here are some of the early astronomers. Now, I've given them star ratings. Isn't that childish? But I'll have 1 star for pretty good, 2 stars for terrific, 3 stars, you're a genius. So some of these people, this Indian fella, mathematician astronomers from the Indian classical age, one of the first astronomers to believe that the Earth was round. Now, that's if you go back to the Greeks, you got people like, they were very, I mean, the interesting thing is, in a way, you've got everything happening in the West in the ancient times, and then in the Middle Ages, it started happening in the East. And near the twain did meet. I mean, these people probably didn't know about, for example, Ptolemy or Eratosthenes or any of those people, because Eratosthenes, established the size of the earth and all those things. They didn't know. And so it wasn't until later that all of this sort of confluence of knowledge took place. Anyway, he also believed that it rotated on its axis, which is good, because there are still people in the Renaissance who believe the earth was static and not moving, and that everything else went around it. The old Ptolemaic model. So, John Philoponus, 2 stars, known as John the Grammarian, a Christian Byzantine philosopher, launched a revolution in the understanding of physics by critiquing and correcting the earlier works of Aristotle, because Aristotle had posited ideas about the movement of the spheres and so on. In the process, he proposed important concepts such as a rudimentary notion of inertia, that is, something remaining at rest unless it's acted on by a force, and the invariant acceleration of falling objects. That's pretty good. Although his works were repressed at various times in the Byzantine Empire because of religious controversy, they could nevertheless become important to the understanding of physics throughout the European and the Arab world. The Venerable Bede, you've heard about the Venerable Bede if you read about some of these religious leaders. A smart man, talked on the reckoning of time and was interested in computers. Now, does anyone know what computers is? I thought, computers? What's that? And computers is a reckoning of Easter, how Easter was determined in the calendar. And it's a really complex procedure. I liken it to working out when the Chinese New Year is. Sorry, having a Chinese person who's from a Chinese family, the Lunar New Year, it can be, the dates seem so rubbery to me, but anyway, not as complicated as this. So they had to calculate Easter, and there were complex ways of doing that. So that was a science in itself called computers. Anyway, then you had this fellow, 1 star, the inventor of algebra. I'll leave him at that, but a clever man. He did. What did he do? He produced a table of latitudes and longitudes of cities and landmarks, which is a great feat. His work, the Zij, now that thing up there is a Zij, that little table, contained around 37 chapters on calendrical and astronomical calculations. So this is an age of recording things and observing and putting them down in writing, which is a good thing. But of course, all of this was mixed up with astrology. Now, as you'll see, in the time of many of these astronomers, astrology was more of a science than the astronomy in the eyes of a lot of these universities who treated astronomy as a liberal art, but astrology as something akin to mathematics and linked to mathematics. And you'll see the astronomers got their money from being astrologers and predicting people's their health and what was going to happen and all that sort of thing. We'll come to that shortly anyway. I thought that was very interesting when I read about that. So this fellow gets 3 stars. Now, Persian astronomer, very clever fellow. Known the outstanding practical astronomers of the Middle Ages, this fellow. In 1964 AD, 964 I mean, he documented the Andromeda Galaxy, the closest to the Earth, and called it a little cloud. This was the first record of a star system outside of the Earth's own galaxy. Al-Sufi prepared charts of the heavens from his own observations, carefully measured them. His book, Kitab al-Kawatib, was considered a masterpiece on stellar astronomy. This book has been translated to many languages, and it had a great influence on European astronomy. Many star names used today have names from his catalogue. Things like Betelgeuse and, Al-Natak, Al-Nalam, they're all Arabic, of course. Al-Kindi, another guy, Muhammad al-Battani, one of the many Islamic scholars who refined Ptolemy's model, so there's still a belief in Ptolemy's model. Pope Sylvester II reintroduced the abacus and the armillary sphere to Western Europe. Now, you've seen those armillary spheres, which are like elaborate planispheres in 3D. positions of the stars and everything else. Yeah, but hollow in the middle, like just made of metal. Again, the love of spheres and circles. He was also responsible, and I think this is equally important, for the spread of Hindu-Arabic numerals. Imagine that, much better than Roman. Anyway, now this guy, 2 stars, Spanish astronomer. What's his name? Maslama Ibn Ahmad al-Bahiri. Yeah, he's most famous for having helped transmit knowledge of maths and astronomy to Muslim Spain and Christian West East Europe. So the teaching went on, even if there weren't any great advances in optical instruments and things like that, telescopes or any form. There's nothing of that, nothing like that at all. Now this fella is amazing. The High Middle Ages is the middle period. Ezekiel, the foremost astronomer of the 2nd millennium, lived in the Al-Andalus and greatly expanded the understanding of accuracy of planetary models and terrestrial instruments used for navigation. He developed key technologies including, I'm going to show you a picture in a moment, of the equatorium and universal latitude independent astrolabe. Omar Khayyam, you've all heard of Omar Khayyam, calculated the solar year as 365.242 days, correct to 6 decimal places, which is no mean feat, and performed a reformation of the calendar. He also compiled astronomical tables like everyone else. Now, there's an Indian chap there, and another Persian theorised, this guy is amazing, he gets 2 stars because he theorised that the Milky Way was made up of many tight clusters of faint stars, which gave the galaxy its milky appearance. Fantastic for the 13th century. There's 3 centuries later, the proof of this came when Galileo used a telescope to study the Milky Way and discovered that it is really composed of huge numbers of tightly clustered stars. And he created a planetary movement model that advanced Ptolemy's theories in this area. So again, we're still stuck in Ptolemy, but we're observing with increasing interest and detail. I won't mention any more of those. I think we'll leave them. English scholar. Yeah, we'll leave them. Pace. I don't know how to pronounce that name. Now, Albert the Great, Doctor Universalis. Now, if you were called doctor, you had a degree from Oxford usually, or a place like that. And Universalis was the Latin for they characterised you by what they thought of you. There was one guy was called Dr. Subtilis, subtle. And there was a Dr. Universalis. They all had these little epithets after their names. So they weren't special qualifications. They just what the university dons thought was an appropriate thing. Oh, this guy's a bit interested in such and such. So they gave him these titles. So this was a doctor of everything. This fellow was a bit of probably a polymath. He's one of the 33 saints of the Catholic Church. Became famous for his vast knowledge that explains the Universalis and for his defence of the pacific coexistence between science and religion, which is very important because then you'd have less conflict if you have the two living side by side. Albert was an essential figure introducing Greek and Islamic science into the medieval universities, although not without hesitation with regard to some Aristotelian ideas. His most famous pupil, by the way, was St. Thomas Aquinas. Remember Thomas Aquinas? And one of his famous sayings, I love this, science does not consist in ratifying what others say, but of searching for the causes of phenomena. So that's a really investigative attitude to science. John of Scarabosco, scholar, monk, astronomer, University of Paris, introduced calculations with Hindu-Arabic numerals, which is important because no one had till then. Reckoning of Easter again. Here you go. It's spelled compotos instead of computus. Ecclesiasticus on Easter reckoning, and he wrote another document on the construct and use of an astronomical quadrant. Did I go backwards or forward? I think I went backwards. I mentioned John before. Roger Bacon down there merits mentioning. Down the bottom, Petrus Peregrinus. No, we can leave those. because we're running out of time. We've got to keep on time. Now, the late Middle Ages, a couple of interesting characters. You've heard of Occam's razor? This is the man. Now, what fascinates me about him, he's Dr. Invincibilis. So I don't know whether it means he was bulletproof or what, or he was supreme, but I love that title. Imagine me calling I'm Dr. Invincibilis. It's like something out of the Marvel comics, isn't it? An English Franciscan friar, philosopher, logician, and theologian. Occam defended the principle of parsimony. Now, if you know what parsimonious means, it means stingy. But in this context, it doesn't mean stingy at all, as you'll see, which could be read into the works of his mentor. I didn't put Duns Scotus in here. It was interesting to read about too. His principle later became known as Occam's razor and states that if there are various equally valid explanations for something, always go for the simplest one. And that's Occam's razor. That's what it means. So this became the foundation of what would be known as the scientific method and one of the pillars of reductionism in science. Getting rid of stuff that isn't important and sticking to what's at the heart of it all. Occam probably died of the Black Plague. Jean Burden and Nicole Orozine were his followers, and I think I've got, there's Occam, William of Occam, on a stained glass window in All Saints Church, Occam in England. I think that's in Surrey, somewhere. Surrey or Sussex, oh, I can't remember. Now, Richard of Wallingford, an English abbot, mathematician and horologist, looked at time. He created that equatorium. Equatorium is a little bit different from an astrolabe, and I'll show you the difference shortly when we come to looking at those. Niccolò Resmo is one of the first original thinkers of the 14th century, theologian, dabbled in Latin, mathematics, physics, astronomy, and wrote his Livre du ciel et du monde, a book on the heavens and the earth, discussed a range of evidence for and against the rotation of the earth on its axis. And in addition to these, he strongly opposed astrology, good man, and speculated about the possibility of a plurality of worlds. So I looked into that, and what it means is he actually thought out there might be many other worlds, not just the ones we see. So thinking outside the box, which is really good. So there is Master Nicole. And Nicholas of Cusa. Now this guy gets 2 stars. A German philosopher and astronomer, who believed the Earth was not at the centre of the universe, the celestial bodies were not perfect spheres, that their orbits were not entirely circular, and advanced the idea of relative velocity. He explained the difference between the theory and appearance of celestial objects. He suggested in some of his scientific writings that the Earth revolved around the sun and that each star itself was a distant sun. Now, I think that's exceptionally good thinking. So, and that was the 15th century, early 15th century. There's Nicholas de Cusa, of Cusa. I think some of these people had a lot of time on this. I mean, to think of this stuff, there must have deep thinking. There's a lot of deep thinking there. Anyway, now, the equatorium and the astrolabe, what's the difference? Well, isn't this beautiful? So this is an Arabic astrolabe from the 1079 to 1080 AD, somewhere around there. The roots of the equatorium lie in the astrolabe. So the astrolabe is the first thing. The history of the astrolabe dates back to 220 BC from the works of Hipparchus. Hipparchus was the guy, you remember, who apparently did a star catalogue and worked out the relative brightnesses of stars. Remember the magnitudes? So you might recall that when I did the early astronomers. So very interesting character. The difference between the 2 instruments is that the astrolabe measures the time and position of the sun and stars at a specific location in time. In contrast, the equatorium is used to calculate the past or future positions of the planets and celestial bodies according to the theory of Ptolemy, which is quite different. So aren't they beautiful? Now that's an equatorium on the right there. This one's a middle one, the red one there, background, 9th century planispheric astrolabe. And then you've got this one down here. Sorry, that relates to that one. The planispheric astrolabe on the left, and above it is the, I'll come to that in a moment. I'll show you. I've got a picture. Oh, I haven't got a picture. There is a picture of an equatorium. I think it was in the previous slide. Remember that thing I showed you, the horizon, a little, very simple device. Now, that's a painting of, I think it's Renaissance. I forget who the painter was, of the Athenian Academy. Now, the thing about the Renaissance was that everyone loved classical things. And so I just put this in as a nice picture, that's all. Harking back to classical Greece and classical learning. And it's kind of typical of the Renaissance. Everything was about Greek and Latin, and people studied that. If you went to school, certainly when Shakespeare lived, he went to a school where Latin was taught as a matter of course, and so was Greek. And they're often fluent in both. The Renaissance, which means rebirth, the next period that we're going to concentrate on, is from 1400 to 1600. It bridged the period between the Middle Ages and the later periods of the Elizabethan and Restoration periods in England and the modern period in Europe. It's most closely linked to Italy, but also happened in Germany, England, and France and other places. The same sorts of cultural interests. The breakup of feudal structures, strengthening of city-states, emergence of monarchies in Spain, France, and England, as well as cultural developments as the rise of secular education culminated in the birth of a new age with a new spirit, and one that looked all the way back to Greece and Rome, and in particular ancient Greece and Rome as well. Great advancements in scientific thinking, that's certainly the case, as you'll see. And you had wonderful creativity. You had Leonardo da Vinci, Shakespeare, Galileo, all of those people. Astronomy began to undergo a revolution known as the Copernican Revolution. So we're going to do Copernicus first quickly. How are we going for time? Bell ringer? All right, I'll speed up. So let's look at, so we all know that that Copernicus broke away from the from the geocentric model and created his own heliocentric or sun-based system. In other words, he believed the sun was at the middle of all things and the planets went around it, in which the planets revolved around the sun and not the earth. His De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium was published in 1543. Now, let's talk a bit about, there are four astronomers in this period: Copernicus, Brahe, Tycho Brahe, Kepler, and Galileo. I'm not going to cover Galileo, as I said at the beginning, because there's too much, just too much. It needs here we are, the Fab Four. Well, I should have said the Fab Renaissance Four. Anyway, so in a chronological order from left to right, basically. So we start with Copernicus, a bit on Tycho, a bit on Johannes Kepler, nothing on Galileo on the bottom right there because we haven't got we haven't got the. I was going to give you a quiz on those faces to see if you knew them. So Copernicus, the first one is a Pole. We'll talk about him briefly. So Copernicus. Born 19th of February 1473, a Renaissance polymath. You all know what a polymath is? Someone who's good at everything. Active as a mathematician, astronomer, a bit like Da Vinci, same thing, and Catholic canon who formulated a model of the universe that placed the sun at the centre. Now, there is, you might remember when I talked about Aristarchus of Samos, Aristarchus had that same idea, but there's no sort of written record that could adequately explain what he actually believed about that. But there are indications that he certainly believed that the sun was at the centre, not the earth. Anyway, the publication of his model in his book, which I just read out to you a minute ago, The Revolutions of the Celestial Spheres, just before his death, was a major event in the history of science and triggered what we call the Copernican Revolution, and making a pioneering contribution to the scientific revolution. Born and died in Prussia, which is part of Poland, the youngest of four children, named after his father, who appears in the records for the first time as a well-to-do merchant who dealt in copper. Mum was Barbara Warzenrode, daughter of a wealthy Turin patrician and city councillor. So he came from a fairly well-to-do family. He was a polyglot and a polymath. Now, what's a polyglot? Poly is Greek for many. So glot is from tongue or languages. So many languages, speaker of many languages. Mathematician, astronomer, physician, classic scholar, translator, governor, diplomat, and economist. He did all sorts of stuff. Copernicus is postulated to have spoken Latin, German, and Polish with fluency. He also spoke Greek and Italian. Most of his extant writings are in Latin, which was, of course, the language of academe. I'll speed up a bit. That's his birthplace there in Torun, in Italy, in Poland. It's still there. Studied at the University of Krakow. He studied Aristotle's theory of homocentric spheres within spheres. And he saw some logical contradictions in it. Aristotle's theory of homocentric spheres and Ptolemy's mechanism, there was something wasn't right. You might remember I talked a bit about Ptolemy. Eccentrics were just orbits, and epicycles were to do the way that they moved. There are drawings out, and there's a thing called a quadrant. Anyway, we won't go into that. Anyway, he thought there were conflicts between them. Now, his uncle was a bishop and a wealthy sort of character, and looked after him and tried to push him into a religious life. But he managed to get out of that by various means. And he went to the University of Bologna, where he studied for a while, until 1501, devoted himself to the humanities, moved away from everything else, and ignored his uncle's requests, although I think he became a canon, so he was sort of preparing to be a priest, but never got there. The epitome of the Almagest is a thing. He verified its observations about peculiarities in Ptolemy's theory of the moon's motion by conducting, on the 9th of March at Bologna, while he was at the university, an observation of the occultation of Aldebaran, Alpha Tauri, the brightest star in Taurus, by the moon. Now, of course, that's on the ecliptic, so this happens regularly, not just then. He sought confirmation of his growing doubts about close reading of the Greek and Latin authors, gathering historical information about ancient astronomical, cosmological and calendar systems. So did a lot of reading and a lot of study. And he observed the lunar eclipse in 1500 as well. Right. University of Padua, he went there to study medicine. You know, it's one of the things he picked up, which came in handy. He may in future be a medical advisor to the Reverend Bishop and the gentleman of the chapter. So they thought it'd be a good thing to support him. He returned again to Italy, where he studied the university, a seat of medical learning, and except for a brief visit to Ferrara, one of his, I forget what Ferrara was, to pass examinations for and receive his doctorate in canon law, he remained at Padua until 1501. Now, one of the subjects that he must have studied was astrology, which was commonplace, since it was considered an important part of medical education and mathematics, as it turned out. So what a fascinating situation. However, unlike most prominent Renaissance astronomers, he appears never to have practiced or expressed any interest in astrology. In other words, he didn't make that his mainstay, but they all dabbled in this. Sometime before 1514, he wrote his heliocentric theory, which is written there in Latin, commonly referred to as the Commentariolus. That's a kind of summary of what he thought. It was a succinct description of his heliocentric model of the universe without mathematical apparatus, and differed in details from the bigger text, which we'll talk about later, about the revolutions of the orbs. But it was already based on some assumptions about the Earth's triple motions, going around the sun, rotating on its axis, etc. The Commentariolus, which Copernicus consciously saw as merely a first sketch for his planet plan book, was not intended for printed distribution. Anyway, after he'd written it, it seems that several Krakow astronomers with whom he collaborated in observing eclipses had a look at it. Tycho would include a fragment of his book in his treatise Astronomiae Instaurantae Progymnasmata, published in Prague in 1602. Anyway, I think the Commentariolus would appear complete only in 1878. So a lot of the stuff they wrote didn't actually get published till later. Gee, it's warm in here. What are we on? Oh, feels like 50. Or is it just me? Anyway, in 1510 or 1512, Copernicus moved to Fromberg. And there now this is really interesting. Presumably he lived in a kind of a stronghold, like a castle. And he used primitive instruments, but instead of using primitive, I'll say that again, I'm speaking too quickly. From a small tower using primitive instruments modelled on ancient ones, a quadrant, triquetrum, I don't know what a triquetrum is, and the armillary sphere. At Fromberg, Copernicus conducted over half of his more than 60 registered astronomical observations. He observed Mars and Saturn. Now, this is at the heart of what he discovered, because concentrating on Mars and Saturn in movements gave him ideas about how, got him away from circles and into ellipses, as you'll see. And especially a series of 4 observations of the Sun in 1515 led to the discovery of the Earth's eccentricity, that is, its orbit was not a circle, and of the movement of the solar apogee in relation to the fixed stars, which prompted his first revisions of certain assumptions about, the old system. He resided at a castle in Warmia, where his Prince Bishop uncle was, and while there he wrote a manuscript with a view to now this is interesting, here he is as the economist, and he creates these fiefs and looks at ways of developing the economy as a sidetrack while he's doing his science, populating the fiefs with farmers and so bolstering the economy of the district he lived in. When Olsztyn was besieged by Teutonic knights from Germany during the Polish-Teutonic War, yet another war, Copernicus directed the defence of Warmia and the area by Royal Polish forces. He also represented the Polish side in the ensuing peace. Now, I call that a very talented man. So he's a diplomat, general, economist, and scientist. So anyway, that's a beautiful excerpt from his major text. And if you look at it, you can't see it here, but this business here has the sun in the middle here. And and there you can just make out, I think, the Earth-Moon system, and we're here. And then you've got the outer planets going out to Saturn. Text from Copernicus, the De Revolutionibus. I'll speed up. I won't go through all this. He did so much stuff. He was a diplomat. This is sort of covers all the things I was just interested in. I thought it was very interesting reading about. Anyway, he completed his work around 1532, and a guy delivered a series of lectures in Rome about Copernicus. Pope Clement VII and several Catholic cardinals heard the lectures and were interested in the theory. These are people from the church. And on November the 1st, Cardinal Nicholas von Schoenberg, Archbishop of Capua in Italy, wrote to Copernicus from Rome an excerpt. I entreat you, most learned sir, unless I inconvenience you, to communicate this discovery of yours to scholars, and at the earliest possible moment to send me your writings on the sphere of the universe, together with the tables and whatever else you have that is relevant to the subject. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking, now, why does he want these? Am I going to be put on trial, for sacrilege, for heresy? But anyway, by then Copernicus' work was nearing its definitive form, but it shows you how interested people were. It wasn't just there were people in the church, you can't say that everyone was disinterested in this idea. Had educated people all over Europe had read some of his stuff. Despite urgings from many quarters, he delayed publication of his book from fear of criticism, a fear delicately expressed in a letter to Pope Paul III. So there were religious clergy who were interested in what he had to say. Anyway, I won't read you all that. Copernicus was seized with apoplexy and paralysis toward the close of 1542, died at the age of 70. Legend has it that he was presented with the final pages of that book we just looked at on the very day that he died, allowing him to take farewell of his life's work. He's reputed to have awoken from a stroke-induced coma, looked at his book, and then died peacefully. Now, I don't know. A lot of these stories are what we say are apocryphal, that is, made up later on after the event, but who knows. Anyway, he was reportedly buried in Fromberg Cathedral, where a 1580 epitaph stood until being defaced. It was replaced in 1735. That's just a Renaissance map of the constellations. For the zodiac constellations, I should be specific. For over 2 centuries, archaeologists searched the cathedral in vain for his remains. They were finally unearthed beneath the cathedral floor and confirmed as being those of Copernicus in 2008. Anyway, that's a famous etching by Dura print. Yeah, beautiful. Made from wood blocks. Now, maybe I'll have to, Well, I'll take 30. Okay, so Copernicus, there's a summary of his theory. So these are all the things. There is no one center for all the celestial spheres. The center of the earth is not the center of the universe. All the spheres surround the sun as if it were in the middle of them all, etc., etc. The ratio, and he comes up with these ratios of the earth's distance from the sun to the height of the sky, the firmament, the outermost region, is so small, so much smaller than the ratio of the earth's radius to its distance from the sun, that the distance from the earth to the sun is almost unnoticeable or imperceptible in comparison with the height of the firmament. In other words, he worked out the stars were a darn huge distance away, an unfathomable distance. And whatever happens in the sky does not arise from any motion of the firmament, but from the earth's motion. So all that stuff's moving because we're moving. What appears to us as motion of the sun arises not from its motion, but from the motion of the earth, and so on. And he talks about retrograde and direct motion of planets. Mars goes backwards, all of that sort of thing. Jupiter. The motion of the earth alone suffices to explain all of that, because we overtake planets, because we're going faster. So he understood all this stuff. Anyway, I'll leave that. I'm wondering whether I should finish this next time. Just the last bit on Copernicus. There's his model there. Can you read that? Can you see that? So we've got Earth and Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. This model. I'll just come back to it in a moment. It's a model I've got a little explanation of it. A model he rationalised was wrong. Now Kepler, I don't know if I won't have time for Kepler. Kepler took Copernicus's model and looked at and thought about this model of the sun being in the centre, and changed it so that it fitted. I think he was afraid, in part, and he changed the model and adapted it to his observations. And then he got Kepler on his deathbed to say, look, please support my theory, and Kepler wouldn't, because Kepler realised that it was wrong, that model was wrong. I think that's actually his model. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. One last thing. A bit about him. Have I jumped the gun? Just a moment. I have jumped the gun. Sorry, that's Tycho's model. I'm talking about Tycho here. That's Tycho's model. I have jumped. I've missed my title slide for not Copernicus. Sorry, I've missed a slide here somehow. That was about Copernicus. That model relates to Tycho Brahe, not to Copernicus. Anyway, so things are named after Copernicus. There's a chemical element named after him, 112 Copernicum. The largest crater on the moon. And there's his grave, his tombstone. And a binary star called 55 Cancri, named in his honour. Where are we? Now, do we want to go on with Tycho? I think we ought to. There's another, I don't know what slide we're up to. We're a fair way through, but I've got about probably too many to keep going at the moment. Well, otherwise we won't have a break, and this will go on too long. I might cover Tycho and Kepler in a separate session, because we need a break, because they're really interesting. This fella came up with that model I just showed you, the sort of morphed model where the sun wasn't in the middle but it was off centre, and his model was very interesting. But Kepler I think Kepler was very smart and stuck to his scientific guns and said these things are untenable, and proved it basically, and despite the obvious threats of heresy and other things. But the interesting thing, as you'll see with Kepler, is he stuck to his beliefs. So he was a person who did not see faith as conflicting with science. In fact, I know this because God has given me this knowledge, not, you know what I mean? That's so he was able to reconcile that. Whereas I think poor old Tycho was a bit, he was a bit more tentative about things, as you'll see. But I won't do that now. I think wouldn't do it justice to race through it. Such an interesting man too, Tycho Brahe. And of course, I think somewhere along here, no, I won't show it now. There's a lovely picture of, I've got a shot of the moon, and I've got a bit of comedy, so I might just end up on a humorous note and show you, oh, wrong glasses, sorry. We might finish there on the last slide rather than taking you to, we're not too far from the end, but we've still got, yeah. But I thought I'd show you, this particular slide. I do enjoy this. You know my love of Gary Larson. So hopefully it'll come up. Now, stay calm. Let's hear what they said to Bill. I don't know, things like that just get to my funny bone. I can really recommend Gary Larson if you're not feeling very happy and you want cheering up. Just find some of his. Some of the things are very dark, but others are just so clever. And he's retired. He must be more than 50 or something. But anyway, so that's it. So thank you, folks. So the other two are really interesting and deserve some time on their own. So what I might do, now that I've got it, is carry on with it at another time. We've got a bit of juncture. And then we'll have Galileo as a separate thing, because Galileo is fascinating. Yeah, really fascinating. Thanks, everyone. So what I'm going to do now, I will put on, while you're having your break, I will put this on. Hang on, escape. I'll put on what we showed. Now, I compiled this thing out of the images of all our members. So what you're going to see are only images from, I think I've got the sound turned down on this, but a little bit. Okay, so let's start, and you can have your break slideshow. Hopefully it'll work. The sound might be off, but there's a constant yeah. It's funny about that movement tonight on PowerPoint. Sometimes it gets quite jerky, you know what I mean? Yeah, anyway, so this is your title slide. And so the show sort of begins from there, and it has pictures all of us have taken. Does that look blocky or? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Well, yes, sure. So that's what I mean. But you can, yeah, it's not bad. Greg is one of our photographers. Probably is exceptionally talented and takes beautiful shots. Here's Ross's. Here, Ross. Ross. So the tarantula, which is always green, although there's no green in spots. Get a physicist to explain. I've never heard of it. Anyway, so they're grouped by these are all naked eyes, so they're grouped. Some people taking multiple shots of the same thing, or multiple shots of the same thing. Oxford Nebula and the Christmas tree. And that's a beautiful shot by Rosny. So these images are a couple of images that have like that is beautiful through the telescope. This area here is fascinating. That's the starry Nicker, and this whole thing's named after it. 6 million plus. That's the range. You see some more pictures of the range. There's one running chicken that's facing down. Can you see? That's its heel and beak. That's a clubfoot. And its tail goes back here. Sometimes when we take pictures, we use different colour palettes to assign colours differently, and it's the same thing but in work because it shows up more rather than just normal. This is Gabriella Mistral, Chilean poet. That's her face, her nose, her mouth. She won the Nobel Prize for literature. There she is again. Have a look. That's the Jim Costa. Yes, exquisite. Sorry about the jerkiness, I don't know why. That's the Great Nebula of Orion, which we're going to be looking at soon. It's Orion's rising now. The thing about this hobby is if you're impatient like me, because these are taken over hours, like 4 hours, 5 hours. Some people spend 40 hours. Look at Lisa's beautiful running hand. Running hand is right next to the Orion Nebula. And that is what we're looking at there. Now there's the Orion Nebula and the Horsehead Nebula. Isn't that exquisite? That is a stunner. Send it on. Sorry. Greg's in Nottingham. There's a shot of Horsehead. Yeah. Greg's, a lot of Greg's photos are taken with a washer of the same thing. You see the spooky face? Look at the skull, 2 eyes, nose. Yeah, that's with my other telescope. That star on the left is the best. It's called Alge. You know the 3 stars in a row in the right? They're sacred to the Egyptians who organised Egypt. The pyramids are in the same position to each other. So one was statue of here. There she is standing there.
Which is very exciting.
Yeah, I understand. There's my statue of here. Now, I'm actually frozen. 3 degrees in the morning. stunning. Seven giant ring giants. And there's my shot of the second. When you look through a telescope, you don't see the colour, but you see they look just beautiful, like you've dropped silver coins in a well. And there's Steve's shot. Steve does. It's unbelievable how much detail he gets in a short amount of time. So all these photos are how long Steve had? Like that. 5 minutes. So not 5 hours like Brisbane, 5 minutes. So there's the sprinter. A man running along, red shirt, gold medal, gold medal chest, he rang down. I always have. That's a butterfly cluster. You see the butterfly? Nobody can see the butterfly. So we did open clusters. That's a great shot. That's a great one. Tiny ring. I don't know how to cut that. That's minuscule. This Steve again. Nothing cluster. I think Steve's met more of the sky than all of us put together. You know, he takes photos and he does a fantastic job of going across the sky. Wait till you see his pictures. And here's a wild duck cluster, that's the Sagittarius. It's good about to just by Sagittarius at the moment. The pearl cluster by Grudzien. The pearl cluster is right above that statue. It's very, very pretty. Now this gorgeous thing is a globular cluster. There's 10 stars. Right. There are 150 of these, and this is the largest. Represents nothing. The whole hemisphere, they can come out here and take photos of this. That's a great shot. And our friend here, Richard, this is only a very reduced file. if I had it, I would have put it in. That's amazing. You'd think that was a Hubble image. Now we have got one, a small maintaining cloud, which is 200. And it's a satellite galaxy gallery. This is going around, it's only got about 10 million stars. That's the brightest aurora that I've seen in my lifetime. I haven't travelled outside. To Norway or Scandinavia. This is a lovely shot. Nice composition.
That's down at Mortimer Bay.
Mortimer Bay. That's us. That's from Fonthill, where we, yeah. Oh, cycling again, sorry. Okay. Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so we've got some, and if you're interested and you want to talk, you always come along and meet us. Because we all started somewhere and we're all on the journey, and sometimes very frustrating, but it's worth it for the rewards.
Well, on behalf of everyone here, Richard, thanks very much for the preparation. Very interesting, and you've actually sold us on the next instalment or 2 instalments. So you've got a great salesman and a great presenter. So thanks very much, Richard.
No,
Okay.
pleasure. All right.